Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Montel Jackson of Why Aren't You Fighting Backson? Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, coming at you following UFC Brazil. Some good stuff, some naff stuff. Mainly going to be talking about the main event because that stole the show. Figgy versus Montel Jackson was mid. Vicente Luque was sad. And there were a bunch of jabronis on this card, but Charles Oliveira, we don't know how much longer we get to enjoy this man, and he is the perfect MMA fighter. In terms of the product, there is no one better. Mr. finishes everyone or gets finished, fights like the fucking Terminator. And I think that this was the huge difference with this fight. Gamrot, I said coming in, like, striking has always been 1-2s off both stances. Won't even throw a fucking low kick. He's had fights where he throws the low kick, it lands brilliantly, and then he just doesn't throw it again. He just won't do anything except 1-2s off both stances, which can work. Kamaru Usman made a title run out of it, combined with his wrestling. Cyril Gane, that's his whole thing, and he's about to beat Tom Aspinall and ruin everything at heavyweight. But with Charles Oliveira, there's always this... The way that he fights is that he's trying to run through a storm of bullets and then get to where he needs to be. And he's constantly aggressive. He's constantly throwing with heat. You know, he can knock people out with both hands. He's constantly looking to get collar ties, elbow, knee, force clinches, front kick the body. But it's always this... part of what makes this fight so exciting is that he has an enormous heart, which is something he had to prove after years of being called a quitter for some of the results of his early fights, but he doesn't have the best chin in the world. So for a long time, even like during his best run, he would get dropped in the first round in every fight and still win. Kind of like Eddie Alvarez during his best run. But boy, did he make Mateusz Gamrot look impotent on the feet here. Gamrot hit him with plenty of the same shots that Oliveira gets hit with because he's going forward constantly. And I went back and watched them all in slow-mo, and they barely even move Oliveira's eyes. Like, he doesn't even care. Mateusz Gamrot, you cannot be this high up in this weight class and not have any power, because it basically ruined the fight for him. I'm aware he dropped Dan Hooker in his last fight and so on, but this is a sport where people get clipped by a jab as they're stepping in, and they get dropped, and then they'll take a full steam haymaker, flush on the jaw later in the same fight, and be fine. Anyone can get caught coming in. Problem is, if the guy is coming in with his head square, you're hitting him clean, that should be doing enough to either hesitate him for a moment, or back him off, or give you space to work, and it was just not happening. Gamrot's pushing out these punches. Pushing, not punching. That's what they always say. And Oliveira was just laughing in the face of them, basically. One of the other reasons that Charles Oliveira fights are so fun is that he is a technique collector. He has all the moves. He's always trying something new, whether it's on the feet or on the floor, so we can get deep into the innards of that. But before we get to the mat, some of the stuff he did on the feet that I loved. Anytime that his opponent comes close, he got hit by Gamrot a couple of times and he crashed into a clinch, grabbed the overhook, so Gamrot had the underhook, and on the other side he had Gamrot's wrist. Had the top of his head pressed into Gamrot's temple. Gamrot realised that he was going to get kneed, so he tried to limp arm his underhook out, because you normally want an underhook, but, you know, if you're wrestling or preventing a takedown, but he wanted to get out of the clinch, so he limp armed his underhook out, and Oliveira immediately switched from the overhook to the collar tie, holding the back of the head, and smashed him with an elbow. If you want to see an Oliveira fight where he just beats a dude up with elbows and knees from collar ties, check out, well, I was going to say the third Nick Lentz fight, but any of the Nick Lentz fights. Also Kevin Lee. Another thing I loved on the feet in this fight, the takedown that Oliveira forced in the second round. He'd been moving Gamrot to the fence constantly because he was backing him up. He kept hitting him with like a left hook as he circled out in that direction, or a right hand to the body as he circled out in the other direction. And so Oliveira backs him up to the fence, changes level, hits him in the body with the right hand and comes up swinging to the head. Then he follows him around and does the same thing again, moves him back to the fence, moves in as if to hit him to the body with the right hand, changes levels. Gamrot keeps his hands high so that he doesn't get caught with the second and third punch in the combination. And Oliveira just takes a body lock on his waist, just moves him into the fence, gets a body lock, and Gamrot is in pure defense mode there. You're not, it's not fighting one underhook against one underhook. That's, oh dear, I'm in a bad spot here. I've got to work out of this. And then from the body lock, he picked him up like he did with Jim Miller and his baby at the end of the fight. And Gamrot tried to sprawl out. Oliveira let him drop down to his knees in what's called the dog fight, when one of you has your arm around the other one's waist and you're next to each other side to side, and the other one has the overhook. And it is a fighting position. You both have options from there. But what Oliveira did, which is something that all the Iranians do in wrestling, when they get to this position, he ran around. He ran his ass from one side of Gamrot to the other. And that put a ton of pressure on Gamrot's whizzer or overhook, and Gamrot had to swing it back over his head and let go, and that left Oliveira on his back, basically. And then if you watch the choke, it's the same scenario we talk about over and over again. The reason I'm always saying, if you're getting, cage fucked, and the guy gets on your back, if he's got one hook in and he's on your back on the cage, get off your hands, roll onto the floor, because stop, drop, and roll. Because the way that you're seeing guys caught all the time right now, think Hamzat versus Robert Whittaker, think this fight, think all of Umar Nurmagomedov's finishes. Oliveira's on his back, Gamrot's on his knees and one hand trying to build up, which means that Oliveira has two hands working for the choke and fighting Gamrot's other hand, and Gamrot only has one hand defending the choke and fighting to keep his hand free. So the choke came through on the same side that he had his hand on the floor, because that's the one that's not defending you. What else happened? In the first round, Gamrot hit a head outside single, cracked him down. It's a very cool position that you don't see an awful lot of guys use, but when you do see it, it tends to be really tricky guys in MMA. You bring them down on their outside hip, and you basically make it a technical shootout rather than a physical strength or them hopping around on one leg thing. And you do put yourself in danger doing it. You're in danger of them running to your back. But what I liked about it was that Oliveira immediately wrapped the head and sat himself to square by throwing in his outside leg behind Gamrot's leg in half guard. Made it hard for Gamrot to sit back, made it easy for Oliveira to square up his hips, and he eventually recovered full guard from there, as opposed to being on one hip as Gamrot tried to run round him. From the overhook, he tried to throw up the triangle like he always does, ended up trying for an omoplata. Gamrot got his arm free, so he wasn't in the omoplata anymore. He wasn't at threat of being shoulder locked. The omoplata never really works as a submission. It used to be you'd say that and then add without the gi, but it doesn't really work in the gi either anymore. What it does is it forces the opponent to roll and you come up on top, or you can chain it together with triangles and other submissions. But what I liked was that even when Oliveira lost the wrist, even when Oliveira lost it and the wrist was on the wrong side of his body, he wrapped his arm around Gamrot's leg, brought it through underneath Gamrot's body, and then grabbed on top of the arm. And he just sort of wedged himself in there and started to work out where he needed to go while Gamrot couldn't run round him. Because one of the big ones when you start attacking an omoplata or you lose the omoplata like that is the guy running around your head. And he can't do that if you've overwrapped the leg that's nearest you. And Oliveira eventually got back to the omoplata. Can't remember how he got on top, but then he ended up on the back of the turtle, pulled him off base. Just all the basic jiu-jitsu stuff done to a really elite level. And I saw this week that he was working with Damian Maia, so that makes sense there. Damian Maia, absolute savant at this stuff. Damian Maia trained for like 3 years, got his black belt and won the Worlds, and then won ADCC, and then said, I'm going to MMA. Unfortunately, Damian Maia never developed hands like Oliveira. I realise now that it's been so long since he retired that a lot of people won't have seen him. If you've never seen Damian Maia fight, go and find some of his submissions, because he's just incredible. I was watching one of the old grappling matches of his against Gabriel Gonzaga. Gonzaga was a guy who had to cut weight to make the UFC heavyweight limit, and Damian Maia was a puffed-up welterweight who fought at middleweight for much of his career. And Maia beats him. There's an absolutely terrific screenshot from one of the old Inside MMA shows, hosted by Kenny Rice and Bas Rutten, and they've got a panel, and it's I can't remember who the other one is, but it's some welterweight, middleweight Damian Maia, and then welterweight Rumble Johnson, but they're sat either side of him, and they absolutely dwarf him. But anyway, that was really good that Oliveira delivered because the rest of this card was pretty bad. Davison Figueiredo versus Montel Jackson, the co-main event. Do you know what basically the whole fight was? The whole fight was Figgy doing that pull and then come back in on the double leg that I keep going, man, that shouldn't work, but it still does. Just try the physical movement of that. Pull as if doing a pull counter, and then try and come back in with your shoulder in the other guy's waist. It's like you're putting a lead time on your reactive shot, and he still pulls it off, so mad respect to him. There's no one quite like him. Montel Jackson did very little. But then he did very little in his fight with Daniel Marcos. He did very little in any of the fights he had with people who weren't utterly washed. Except Damon Blackshear, who ran onto him immediately. And even in round 3, when he was down 2 rounds, Montel Jackson did barely anything. So I've seen other people say, yeah, we're happy. I think it was Caposa said after this, I'm quite happy seeing this guy once a year. Just, if you look at the record and you weren't there for those fights, you'd be like, oh, who is this young, exciting prospect coming up? But if you saw those fights, you're like, oh, why is this guy the favourite against Davison Figueiredo? And it was mainly to do with the fact that Davison Figueiredo was coming back from a really bad injury and on a 2-fight losing streak. But the 2-fight losing streak was to 2 of the best fighters in the world. Then there was Yoel Alvarez versus Vicente Luque. I was partly intrigued by this because it was Yoel Alvarez up at welterweight. He has been a colossal size bully at lightweight. He missed weight by an enormous amount in his last one. And he's 6'3" at lightweight, which is absurd. He was going to end up being bigger than Vicente Luque, which we all, we saw the tail of the tape. We knew he was going to be bigger, but he wasn't going to be as much bigger as he usually is. So there was an intrigue in could Vicente Luque be physical enough for him. But equally, Vicente Luque is so washed. Unbelievably washed. He's been washed. Well, he shouldn't have fought again after the Jeff Neal fight. The fight where he suffered an almost life-ending brain bleed. That was when I didn't want to see him again. And they brought him back a dozen times since then. He stopped Themba Gorimbo in a minute. And that was enough for people to be like, see, he's not washed. It's just fighting. If you beat someone, then all that damage you suffered, all the near life-ending injury, the fact that you're slipping and you clearly don't have it anymore, doesn't matter because you did finish one guy. But man, round 1 of this, Joel Alvarez, there's a moment in round 1, probably a minute and a half in, Joel Alvarez pumps a shoulder at him. He just shows him a fake. It's a pretty obvious fake. From outside, it's a pretty obvious fake. I'm not seeing it from Luque's spot, but you've seen a billion fakes in your life. Fakes a jab. Luque tries to throw the right hand across the top as he's done a billion times before, but Alvarez has already pulled up short by the time he starts throwing it, and he just swings through, misses, tries to run him down, utterly fails. It was like he was fighting with lag. It was crazy. And Yoel Alvarez just jabbed at him, smashed him with front kicks. Some lovely combinations in this fight, like front kick, jab, low kick. He entered with a front kick and ducked a return and threw a low kick as he ducked to the inside, which I thought was gorgeous. And then where Alvarez had in the UFC, until he met Elvis Brenner, he had stopped 0 takedowns. Oh, he'd stopped 1 against Mark Chikese, but he had one of the lowest takedown defense ratios in UFC history. And against Elvis Brenner, he actually started trying to stop takedowns and did well. And here against Vicente Luque, who I thought, the one thing that you've got going is that you're a naturally bigger man in terms of stockiness and hopefully muscle. Try and get him down, and he couldn't. Alvarez sprawled on him. Alvarez threatened him with the DARS when that's Vicente Luque's move. I will say the really sad bit about this is that Vicente Luque went back to his corner and he got the pep talk between round 1 and round 2. And between round 2 and round 3, he is leaning on his coach, I think it was Henry Hooft, leaning on his shoulder, unresponsive. I think he might have said, I can't win. And Hooft just went, get out there, Tiger. Fucking MMA corners, man. They just, they'll let you die out there. Anyone involved in Vicente Luque's career since his brain bleed seems to be happy to let him die. So that was really sad, especially as he was one of my favourite fighters. And again, it's been so long now that you may not have seen I think it was an 8-fight winning streak, 9-fight winning streak he was on at one point in the welterweight division in the UFC. And he was knocking out everyone because he's a terrific offensive counterpuncher. He moves forward and he either slips inside your jab and throws the right hand across the top, or slips down in front of you and comes up with the left hook. And by walking people down and doing that, you can really mess people up. It's a very knockout producing style, offensive counterpunching. Because you fluster the guy and you make him take bad shots and you make him open up in ways that maybe he shouldn't while trying to punch him. And if you're a good offensive counterpuncher, you use those two offensive counters, the inside slip overhand across the top, the cross counter, and the slip left hook. You use those to then throw combinations off that. Mario Pinto beat Jonata Diniz. I don't think I've seen Jonata Diniz win a fight, to be honest. I tend to skip his fights, but yep, he was billed as the kickboxer. He was billed as a multiple-time kickboxing world champion, and I can only find a photo of him holding one belt. That's the key. Normally, when they're billed as a multiple-time kickboxing world champion, they have the Jairzinho Rosenstruck photo with 8 bullshit belts for organizations that have no business calling their belt a world title. But Pinto took him down easily in round 1 and mauled him, and then took him down easily in round 2 and mauled him. And then he did a pretty funny post-fight speech where he said, me no speak of English. And then, obviously, like, it worked because people don't know him, but he's been training in London for 10 years or whatever. And he has a British accent. He just did a full post-fight speech in English. And that was the gag. And Bisping looked really annoyed by it. But it made me laugh. I was like, right, you are top 3 heavyweights just based on that. At least top 3 interesting heavyweights. Khan Offley choked out my boy Ricardo Ramos, which I'd be fine with. Ricardo Ramos is my boy, even though he's always losing. But man, 4 or 5? I think 4, not even unpunished, uncommented upon. Maybe you noticed one of them, but just cage grabs. Literally pulling his weight around with cage grabs. There are times when you rest your hand on the fence and your fingers go in, and I get that happens. But if you physically pull your weight from one place to another by the hand that is in the fence, that should be a fucking point deduction immediately. Because you've done something by holding the fence. He even pulled himself onto the back by holding the fence. So fuck this guy. Lucas Almeida got knocked out by Michael Aswell and just looked like he didn't belong. I mean, he's on like a 4-fight losing streak in the UFC. Jafel Filho almost snapped Clayton Carpenter's arm off. This was a classic Kimura from bottom half guard where the guy leaves his arm out and then suddenly it gets popped behind his back. And these happen all the time in the gym because people, there isn't really a good answer once the Kimura is behind your back. Your answer is to roll to the bottom and hope that the ground stops them from cranking their arm up behind your back. But it didn't. And Carpenter did a Brazilian tap, the first tap, waited to see the guy let go, and then tapped for real. Very good work by Filho to not let go until the referee saw it and called it. There was a very egregious one and a very egregious attempt at one in the Craig Jones Invitational a couple of weeks ago. But Murilo Bustamante had to submit Matt Lindland twice in the same fight, in a UFC title fight, because Matt Lindland tapped and on the side that the referee couldn't see. And then as soon as Murilo Bustamante let him go, he started punching again. It was like, fight's still going, bro. What are you doing? Matt Lindland, legendary cheater. Didn't wash for weeks before fights. Didn't wash for weeks before wrestling matches, which is an amateur sport. You're making no money from it, bro. Why are you destroying your whole life? Like just by stinking out your house for 2 weeks before you wrestle. Oh, on the subject of Matt Lindland, if you want to see cheating done right, Fedor versus Matt Lindland. Fedor in his prime as the best heavyweight in the world takes a match against a middleweight in the ring, immediately starts getting ragdolled, throws his elbow over the top rope so that his armpit always catches the top rope and prevents him being taken down. And the referee does nothing because they can't get you for that. If you throw your elbow over the top rope, you just go, oh no, this is just how I'm falling and the ring's stopping me. Classic MMA technique in the ring. Did it a load against Coleman as well. And then Adrian Lee did it against Shinya Aoki a couple of years ago. Anyway, I'm going on tangents because the rest of this card was just okay. Vitor Petrino knocked out Thomas Peterson with an amazing uppercut that made him do the worm. I couldn't believe this knockout. When I went back, I had to keep rewinding it because he hits him with an uppercut left hook and Thomas Peterson falls on the floor and his head snaps back and he does like the worm on the floor. It's incredible. Bia Mesquita got a rear naked choke over Irina Alekseeva. People you know, people posting clips of this and being like, very cool move. And Via Mosquito does have cool moves. She had, I think, 3 matches with Fionn Davis. She lost the last 2 at ADCC. And that's why she moved into MMA, because she's not the best grappler in the world anymore. But she's always had cool moves. She had a closed guard where she'd get you hand fighting with her. So she'd get you trying to hold her wrists. And then once you were holding her wrist, she'd throw her arm up overhead, like she was doing an old school taekwondo or karate rising block, and jump her legs up around your shoulder and get halfway to the armbar and then finish it. Like, she has no grips. She lets you grip her, and then she takes advantage of it. Loads of cool stuff like that for Via Mosquito, but she did gift wrap this lass, which is where you get them out and you pass their arm across their body. You pass their arm across them, and then you grab it behind their head. So if you don't know what you're looking at, you're like, oh my God, he's choking him with his own arm. But it was it's a thing that is coming back into vogue. Gordon Ryan does it loads. But it was a big thing for Hickson Gracie back in the day. He used to get the gift wrap, and then he'd push your tricep and turn you on your side and just start punching you from there. It's a way of like locking the guy down, preventing him from stopping you hitting him, and really encouraging him to just turn his back and let you choke him. Which ultimately this last did. But the whole thing is like, this is absolutely a squash match. This is Via Mosquito versus a girl on a 3-fight losing streak in the UFC. So when people say like, this is what Mackenzie Dern should have been, I'm like, I think Mackenzie Dern, I think that Virna Jandiroba versus Mackenzie Dern is one of the worst title fights we've ever had. But I do think Mackenzie Dern has been doing her stuff against opponents several stratums above this lass. Lucas Rocha versus Stuart Nickel was all right. Stuart Nickel just looked lost. He wanted to take down and he couldn't strike effectively into it. Karolina Kowalkiewicz got head kicked and stopped with punches, basically because she's never stopped. She's never learned to throw her hands properly. They're always like, she throws one hand, leans forward, and the other hand's down by her waist, and then she repeats the process on the other side, doesn't really have any power on them, and she often closes her eyes when she does it too, if you remember from the Jessica Andrade fight. But it annoys me because Karolina Kowalkiewicz, one of her surprising strengths was knees in the clinch. She got boxed up by a young Rose Namajunas and then beat her down with knees in the clinch. And Namajunas just gassed horribly because obviously she's so, in that weight class, this was down at strawweight, Namajunas cut a ton of weight and she was really tall and skinny. And they are the what are they called? Mesomorphs, ectomorphs, lank cells? Lanklets. They react the worst to get hit in the body, typically. But man, Kowalkiewicz has lost a lot in recent years. And then Luan Lacerda beat Simon Oliveira. There was one cool thing in this fight from Oliveira, which was a shoulder crunch into a bridge sweep from the bottom of half guard, which I've never seen work. So I'm going to go play that around. I'm going to workshop that, lab it. I did do a double take because when I saw Lacerda on the screen, just at the bottom, I was like, they let Lacerda's bum ass come back. Daniel Lacerda went 0-5 and won no contest in the UFC. And they kept him around because he was a flyweight who would lose in the first round. And, give some people some finishes in the division where guys don't finish that much. But we lost from this card. What did we lose? Oh, obviously the Fiziev in the main event. But we lost Walter Walker versus Muhammad Usman. Muhammad Usman tested positive for elevated testosterone, which I know you can't believe. I said this years ago when he came to the UFC. Kamaru Usman, his dad is a pharmacist who went to jail for pharmacy crimes. And the whole time he was having his career, people were like, I can't believe his incredible cardio, this, that, and the other. And I was going, if I were Kamaru, I would pay my obviously roided to the tits brother not to draw attention to this. I would pay him to do any other job. But he didn't. So here we are. Anyway, that was the card. It was mid. It was a lot of random Brazilians who maybe aren't UFC. I mean, it's kind of like when they come to the UK. It's a load of guys who maybe aren't UFC level, but are in the UFC and are kept in the UFC even on losing streaks just because we're going to go back to Brazil eventually. But Charles Oliveira, though, what a man. That'll do us for this week. I'll be back later in the week with stuff that I care about because it's one of those weeks where I get to write anything I want. And then this weekend we got Renier Derrida versus Brendan Allen and a couple of other interesting fights on that one. So stay tuned. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. Me no speaker to English, bless.